Well, it's been a long, hard week of editing, but we're finally almost there at the top 10 books of the year. Wait, in the previous episode, did I accidentally put in there a book that didn't come out in 2020 but actually came out over 2 decades before it? Don't! Well, it's been 2 long weeks of editing, but after all this time, we're finally almost here at the top 10 books of the year. Wait. In the previous episode where I went back and took out that book that accidentally came out over 2 decades before 2020, did I remember to shuffle all the numbers around so that way everything made sense again? Don't! So here's the top 10 books of the year, everyone. I'm just kidding. We'll get into the top 10 in just a second, but you might be wondering what the heck that intro was about. Hey, before we get into the top 10, we actually have an honorable mention this year. But it's a very different honorable mention than the type of honorable mentions that we normally have. For anybody who's been with the top 100 comics of the year list for a long time now, you know that we used to have this unintentional running gag where every single year I would have an honorable mention, and it would be a book that I completely forgot to include in the top 100 comics of the year list, but it would have been a book that absolutely deserved to be in the top 100. So before the top 10, I would always come in here and go, hey, here's that book that I totally forgot to put in here. Sorry, everybody. But over the past couple of years, I switched completely over to doing digital comics, so we haven't had that problem because I don't have to shovel through all my physical books anymore. Instead, I just go to the big list of digital comics that I have and go, check. Yep, that's all of them. That's all the books that I read in 2020. So yeah, we haven't had that problem of me missing books over the past couple of years. This year, though, we had the exact opposite problem. You see, normally, I always look around at everybody else's best comics of the year list. And that helps me decide what books I should check out. If I see a book pop up on a bunch of people's best of the year list, I always go, all right, I haven't read that yet. Let me track that down. And there was one book that appeared on almost everyone's best of the year list. It was a manga called Ping Pong by Taiyo Matsumoto. Now, if you are familiar with this show, I have said that we don't include manga because that would just be way too many things for me to read. That would double the number of books that I would have to read, and there's no way that I could get to all that stuff. However, this year, we changed that rule around. I said, okay, if it's not serialized manga, and instead it's an original graphic novel manga, like it comes out straight there in the book, no collections of anything, it's just the book itself, and I can say for a fact that that book came out this year in America, the same year that it came out over in its original country, then it will count. And the entire reason that I changed that rule around was because everyone was saying this book was amazing, and I tracked it down, and yeah, it was amazing. So I was like, all right, sure. I mean, this one feels like it should count. It feels like it should fall under the original graphic novels rule. So we're going to check this out. And I did my research, and I found everywhere I looked, it said this book came out in 2020. This book came out in 2020. And it was going to be our number 11 book of the year. The number 11 book of the year, so way up there. It was a great read, really enjoyed it. If you enjoy sports mangas, or if you just enjoy stories about people competing and people trying to be better, but everybody going through their own personal struggles as they all have this goal that they're trying to reach, which is really kind of the big appeal of sports series, especially if you want something that involves like a team where everybody has their own personal goals and they're all coming together towards this one objective. Yeah, this book is great for that. This book is amazing for that. And as I said, I looked around and I researched it, and everybody just kept saying this book came out in 2020. So I was like, all right, good. It was not until after we had already recorded all the episodes for the best of the year list that finally I found the source material for this. Everything in this book came out in 1996, which would probably explain why I don't remember seeing anyone use cell phones in this book at any time. Yeah, so it doesn't count. So that rule that I made for new manga, that would count? Yeah, it didn't apply to anything this year. So I had to go back, kick out of the number 11 spot, bump everything up one notch, And that's how we got here. And that's another reason why our top 100 videos, despite my computer dying on me and me having to fish out my old laptop to add all this together, it was even still later than that. Because even after taking care of all that stuff, there was another problem that popped up and we had to go back through and redo everything. So, that is your unintentional honorable mention of 2020. So that tradition lives on even when I can see all the stuff that I read this year. But there you go. That's all the build-up. That's the honorable mentions. If you guys missed out on all the rules of what counts for this year, even though some of those rules didn't mean anything in the end, and if you guys missed out on numbers 100 through 11, the actual number 11, not like those fake number 11s that almost get me in trouble, then how many Simpsons references am I going to squeeze into this intro? The card for those previous episodes should be popping up right now. Check those out. Hope you guys enjoy them. And when you're all done with that, when you're all caught up, then come back for the number 10 book of the year. Enjoy. Number 10, Superman Smashes the Klan. Remember how I said that normally you needed 2 issues to come out to be considered for our list, but this year I was making an exception that if your issue was the final issue of a miniseries and it was oversized, then it would count? Yeah, I literally made that exception just so that way we could include the final issue of this book. This series took a classic radio drama starring Superman that was meant to speak out against the Klan and handed it over to Gene Luen Yang, who I have already spoken very highly about multiple times on this list, and he not only used this book to fight against the intolerance and bigotry that the original drama did, but he also added a whole other layer in there as he took Superman's alien origins and used it to tell the story of an immigrant coming to America and having to balance their new life and their heritage. This is a subject that many writers have tackled before, but this is possibly the most personal and real it's ever felt, making Superman feel incredibly human, which is something that only a truly talented writer can pull off. Number 9, John Constantine, Hellblazer. I've read a fair amount of John Constantine books in my life, having read huge chunks of the old Vertigo stuff, the classic Swamp Thing series, and his modern incarnations where he's more a staple part of the DC universe. So I don't want to come in here and try and claim I'm a big John Constantine expert, but I do have a history with the character. And just speaking personally, this is probably the best John Constantine series I have ever read. And yes, that is a very high bar to pass. The series takes the classic Vertigo John Constantine, the one from the 80s and 90s, and sets him in the present day, where he finds himself to be a man out of time and his already, let's say, quirky habits stand out even more clearly. Which is sort of what this book is about. It's about Constantine dealing with what an unforgivable bastard he's always been in the way that John knows best, by continuing to be an unforgivable bastard. However, he now finds himself without a home, without his resources, and without many of his old supporting cast members, so in many ways, he has to start fresh, and it essentially creates an environment where John can now really show off his resourcefulness and manipulation, i.e., the stuff that people like most about John Constantine. Quickly, he builds up a new cast of characters, all of whom are great additions to the series, and the type of mysteries that he pursues are the perfect blend of weird and trippy, as well as down-to-earth and grungy, and it hits that exact tone that you want from a Hellblazer series. If you have never read any Constantine series, I don't think there is a better opportunity to start than with this series. Number 8, Immortal Hulk. We're on year 3 of Immortal Hulk, and it's still going strong, and that's really saying something because this was the year that I was kind of hesitant about its future. Because so far, Al Ewing has done a wonderful job embracing the Hulk's horror origins, but I saw the villains that were planned for this year, and I had no idea how they were going to keep that same tone going. Well, Ewing proved again that he knew what he was doing as he twisted characters like Ximnu into grotesque body horror monstrosities, but more importantly, he took characters like Dario Auger and used them to sort of redefine the Hulk. Over this run, the new Immortal Hulk has been taking more of an active role in the world, addressing larger issues such as mankind's treatment of the planet, and when it came time for him to face off with Marvel's big stand-in for evil corporations everywhere, Roxxon, it became clear to me what Ewing's plan was. You see, the Hulk has always been about anger, but it's always been about personal anger. Bruce Banner's own issues coming to the surface. But now, he's meant to represent our collective anger. That feeling of knowing that some massive corporation or powerful individual has so much control over you, has so much power over how the world is run, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. Compared to them, you're just, well, to borrow a phrase from the Hulk, puny. And reading the Hulk this year, it became clear to me that the goal of this incarnation of the Hulk is that he is the people's anger. He's the one who doesn't want to smash another big monster. He wants to smash an unjust society that the rest of us can't possibly stand up to. And I think that's a very bold direction to take this character. And that was just what happened in the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, they started focusing more on the Hulk's old enemy of the Leader, making him a master manipulator who is serving as a constant source of tension as he continuously takes bad situations and makes them grow and grow till you, the reader, have no idea what will happen next. This is easily the best thing anyone has done with that character in decades, if not ever. Number 7, the Kill Lock. Here comes our biggest surprise of the year because I hadn't heard anything about this book. The creator, Livio Romandelli, was totally new to me, and it was from IDW, a company that does put out good stuff, but it's rare anything from them breaks into our top 10. Heck, it's rare anything from them breaks into our top 25. And yet by the time I got to the end of the first issue, I was head over heels in love with this title, and it kept me engaged with each issue that came out this year. Kill Lock is a story of a world filled with robots. Every planet is made up of robotic life, every race is an android, and everyone is governed by this universe's unique set of laws set up for artificial life. And in this world, if you're a criminal, if you are viewed as being irredeemable, then they don't sentence you to death. No, instead, they pair you up with 3 other robots, and they put a program in you called the Kill Lock, where if one of you dies, then all 4 of you die. So in other words, if you're a criminal, they don't shove you in prison. Instead, they take these 3 other robots and they turn them into your living jail cell. So now, you've got a deranged serial killer, a recovering alcoholic whose life was ruined by one mistake, a religious zealot who has lost his purpose, and a 4th mystery figure who I won't spoil, all on an interstellar quest to find a way to undo their kill lock before they die. The concept of this book is genius, one of the most unique ideas of anything I have ever read. And the strange collection of characters who are forced together make up an amazing ensemble cast. Seeing this holy warrior having to reflect on what he's done and try to find a new path in his life, seeing the recovering alcoholic trying to keep everyone in check while he can barely keep himself together, and watching the absolute X factor that is the mad murderer constantly tempt the rest of them, all while the book contains some of the best dialogue of any series this year, it is a master's course in how to write character dynamics. There are so many lines in this book that are just the perfect example of how to do setup and delivery in a comic. This book gets a massive recommendation from me, and it's only 6 issues long, and at the time of this recording, the first 4 issues are free on Comixology Unlimited, so if you have that program, there is nothing to lose. Go and check this out. Number 6, Billionaire Island. Balancing heavy social commentary and zany off-the-wall comedy can be a difficult balance for most writers. Mark Russell is not most writers. Having already established their unique way of delivering messages through humor over at DC Comics in titles such as Prez, Wonder Twins, and Flintstones, this year in Billionaire Island, it almost felt like they were always holding back and now the restraints were lifted. This is the story of a future where basically rich people have broken the plan. Cities are flooded, people are hungry, unemployment is through the roof, but none of that matters on Billionaire Island. Yes, this is the island that the wealthiest people on the planet have created so that way they can escape when the rest of the world goes to crap. Think of it as one giant golden parachute so they can ride out the apocalypse without having to face any consequences. Russell uses his wild sense of humor to craft a world that feels exaggerated, but not by as much as you might think. You can't help but read this book and think, okay, the giant hamster cage that they're keeping their prisoners in, that might be a bit too much. But the rest of this is shockingly accurate, and the jokes in the giant hamster cage make the shockingly accurate stuff way easier to swallow. However, these wealthy elites are about to learn that you can't fully escape your past and everything you've done does have consequences, as this book quickly turns into a revenge story. Not just for one character, but sort of for the entire planet at large. And it's sort of amazing how the story balances these more serious moments with sight gags that feel like they came straight out of a David Zucker movie. This is a book that is going to make you laugh, but then it's going to make you angry, but in all the right ways. Number 5, Pulp. Ed Brubaker has been putting out several stellar pieces of work as part of his agreement with Image Comics to head up their new push for original graphic novels, and Pulp might be the best book he's put out so far. It's sort of the culmination of all of his strengths. It focuses on an aging writer in the early 1940s who makes his living writing pulp Western comics. However, what he doesn't tell anyone is that everything he writes has an ounce of truth to it, because in his younger days, he was an outlaw in the West. But the Wild West was a long time ago. Those days are gone, and now a man who spent his youth robbing and riding free is struggling to pull money together to provide for those close to him. Then one day, one of the lawmen who had been hunting him down finally catches up to him. But he's not here to turn him in. No, he's here to ask him for help, as he needs the help of a former outlaw to take down some people who are far, far worse than him. And if you look at the time period this book is set in, you can probably guess who I'm talking about. The tone and the art style of this book create a perfectly realized pulp noir setting. Our protagonist has a long trail of character development and depth to him, and the story keeps building in tension until I was racing through each page to see what happened next, and then at the end of it all, the book serves as a strong message about standing up to evil, and it felt pretty cathartic after everything that we've been through over the past couple of years. Number 4, Daredevil. I'll start this off with a confession. We put Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil on our list last year, but I mostly put it on here because, as I've said many times before, I try and take what other people think of a book and what I think of a book and sort of balance it out, and I was mostly putting it on here because everyone else was loving it. I saw what people said they liked, I saw how much both critics and audiences were praising it, and I said, okay, I can see what people are enjoying, but personally, I thought it was just okay. There was one thing in here that made it stand out from most Daredevil stories, but aside from that, it felt like just a pretty standard Daredevil series to me. But this year, I got it. I don't mean the book suddenly became great. No. I mean, I finally saw what everyone else was enjoying in the book. I even went back and reread everything in this series from the beginning, just so that way I could really see what I thought of the series now, and yeah, it was always there. I just couldn't see it. This book had always been incredible, and now I had a whole new appreciation for it. I love that this book is tackling something that people have brought up time and time again with superheroes, especially street-level heroes who tend to focus on stopping bank robbers or just regular criminals, which is that eventually something has to go wrong. We have all seen Batman do a takedown on someone and think to ourselves, yeah, I know you say you have a no-killing rule, but that guy is dead. You beat that guy up so bad, they are not surviving that. And in this series, Daredevil accidentally kills someone. And Matt Murdock, being the guilt-riddled Catholic that he is, indeed goes on his own personal journey to try and figure out how to deal with that. But the book also sits down and has an argument about what it's like to be a superhero. We see people actually arguing, well, maybe we should turn a blind eye to it because, sure, it was bound to happen eventually. You've got guys in masks just running around punching people who are trying to shoot them. Eventually, one of them was going to go too far and something bad was going to happen. But the book doesn't frame it like that's the right answer. It makes that argument sound as wrong as it should sound, but it then turns to the audience and challenges them to realize that's kind of what we do when we cheer these heroes on to come in here and beat up random criminals. And that's just the stuff with Matt Murdock. This book has also taken Wilson Fisk and turned him into almost an equal protagonist in the title. And we see the complex relationship that Wilson Fisk has with Hell's Kitchen, as he views it as just as much a home as Daredevil does. And the series creates a villain to unite Daredevil and the Kingpin, but it's not some big interstellar monster or supervillain with ultimate power. No, it's a wealthy family that is just trying to move into their neighborhood. And you see just how much power money can buy them. They have so much influence, they can burn down an entire neighborhood and keep anyone from knowing about. And this is the perfect enemy for Daredevil because he's always been the most street level of street level heroes. Spider-Man protects an entire city. Daredevil micromanages the crap out of 20 blocks. He is a very small-time hero. So pitting him against people with so much wealth that they're practically untouchable makes this a perfect David and Goliath story for our hero. And I haven't even mentioned all the stuff that happens after Daredevil well, then you're starting to get into spoiler stuff. So let's just say this book says a lot, and I am now fully on board with it. Number 3, Ice Cream Man. I've mentioned this before, but normally when a book premieres in our top 100 list, it gets a good bump in that first year just from the newness factor. When a book can come in here with a surprising premise that stands out from anything else that we've seen, that makes us stand up and pay attention to it. But it's rare that over the years a book like that can continue to stay so high or even climb higher as the series goes on. But this year, Ice Cream Man, after having already been on our list for the past 2 years, made the largest jump we have ever seen on this list, because not only does the anthology format of this series allow it to stay fresh from issue to issue, this was the year that this title decided to deliver emotional gut punches one after another. The series had always had a fair amount of depth to it, making it akin to something like The Twilight Zone, where it goes in, twists someone's life upside down, then walks away having given the audience a warped tour of that character's psyche. But this year, they weren't holding back. It almost felt like they weren't even trying to focus on the creepy subplot of the Ice Cream Man or whatever horrifying creations they could think up, but instead, they just wanted to make the audience sit there and soak in what they had just read. The issue about the elderly man losing his memories to Alzheimer, their Christmas special that tackles serious questions about a girl finding herself pregnant, the How to Be a Ghost issue that... Listen, I'm not even smart enough to sum up everything that issue did. It feels like this was the year that Ice Cream Man went from being one of the most unique horror comics out there to being arguably the greatest anthology comic series ever. Not just anthology horror comic series, no, I'm placing this firmly at the top of just anthologies in general, no matter what genre they're a part of. Also, totally worth mentioning, but when comic shops shut down early in the year, the creators of this title kept making stories online, then put all those stories together into the Quarantine Comics special, and 50% of the profits from that book went to helping comic shops that were struggling in this economy due to the current pandemic. Yeah, I feel like that gives it a few extra bonus points. Number 2, Kent State, 4 Dead in Ohio. Last year was a really strong year for important biographical comics. Really depressing, important biographical comics. In 1970, the National Guard was called to Kent State University in Ohio to respond to protests against the Vietnam War. Tensions grew over the course of several days as the National Guard occupied the campus until it led to a shooting in which the guards injured 9 students and killed 4. This book shows the events of these days playing out from the point of view of multiple key figures in order to capture every corner of this story, and out of all the biographical comics I've read this year, this one easily does the best job of putting you in that time and place. You feel like you get a complete view of all the events. You feel like you're there in that moment. But most importantly, this shines a light on an event that many have forgotten about but needs to be viewed, especially with how it connects to modern day. There are so many moments in here where even though it was 50 years ago, I couldn't help but feel almost like it was happening now. For example, there is a moment where they are focusing on how nobody really had any information, so everyone kept spreading rumors, and those rumors kept feeding into a paranoia which just raised tensions among everyone in an already volatile situation. There's a moment where they show the National Guard going back and forth saying, "Look out, there are snipers all over town. The protesters have set up snipers everywhere on the rooftops. You can't even see them yet, but trust me, they're there." At which point the narrator comes in to clarify, no, there were no snipers. Or they talk about how many student protest groups had been infiltrated by government agents and that many of the acts of aggressions were linked back to these undercover agents. And seeing stories like that, I couldn't help but think back to seeing the violence that we saw from the police last year in response to protests across the country, and how this led to rising tension and riots across the entire United States, and how it felt like every single week there was some new rumor spreading around the internet that was almost immediately disproven, but the paranoia caused by that rumor had already done its damage. Listen, in any other year, this book still would have been in our top 10, heck, probably would have made it into our top 5. But last year, in 2020, I feel like this was the book that people needed to read. It was like taking a history book and holding it up like a mirror to what was happening around us. And our number 1 book of the year comes from a writer who I have already mentioned many times on this list. In fact, if there was one author who I would call our writer of the year, it would be him. Heck, this isn't even the first time that they have appeared in our top 10. At number 1, it's Dragon Hoops from Gene-Luen Yang. This was a bit of a departure for Yang, as the book is one half an autobiography, as the book starts with him not knowing what he should write his next comic about. He's suffering hard from writer's block, but he notices that the school that he teaches at is starting to get a bad case of sports fever. Everyone is talking about the upcoming basketball game, and Yang grew up never being interested in sports. So he decides to finally ask the school's coach to talk to him, and the more they talk, the more he realizes this is the book. This is what he needs to write about. The book then serves to tell multiple different stories. On the one hand, it's a history of basketball, explaining how the sport grew over time. Then the book stops to focus on his school's team as they're on their way to the championship and explores each member of the team individually. It talks about their past, why they play basketball, what the game means to them, what the championship means, and before you know it, you have a rich, full cast of characters. And the book doesn't just focus on the high points, it brings up some dark parts of this school's history, and Yang even struggles in the book itself with whether or not he should include that, but it is part of the story and he does have to address it, and even though those moments are dark and nobody wants to talk about them, it does add some much needed weight to these characters and to the situation that they're in. This book takes an actual real team of players and structures each of their stories in the way that a brilliant work of fiction would, in which it makes sure to focus on each of their individual stories and then ties all those stories together into a point, into a moment where everything has been leading towards, so that way when you read that moment, you have all their stories and all these characters and everything that this means to each of them pushing ahead to create an unstoppable momentum. When the story reached that championship game, I was reading through those pages with the focus and anticipation that I watched the Super Bowl with. And yes, I know the Super Bowl is football, so I really should have used a basketball metaphor in this situation, but what can I say? Football is the sport I watch. Which brings me to the other thing that's magical about this series. Gene-Luen Yang never watched sports. It wasn't for him. He even says in the book that he thought watching sports was boring and he hated it. But that's the other side of this story. As I said, this is also an autobiography about Yang himself, as he talks about his past with sports, and it's the story of how he comes to love sports. And just speaking personally, I don't really love sports myself, but I do love the love of sports, if that makes any sense. I love the big tournaments, I love the stories, I love learning about the people behind the games, and I love seeing how sports bring people together. And this entire book is about Yang learning about the love of sports. It is about him understanding what that feels like. And it's about how watching these players convinces him to make some tough choices in his own life. The book is uplifting, with a fully fleshed out cast who adds so much to the weight of the story, and in the span of one book, does one of the best jobs I have ever seen any story in any medium do of capturing what is special about sports. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, our top 100 comics of 2020. I just want to take a moment real quick to say, we all know that 2020 was a very rough year, so I want to take this moment to sort of applaud every single writer and every single artist and every single colorist and every single inker and every single editor and everyone out there who, despite some of the roughest situations they have probably ever had to face in their entire careers, kept putting out work, kept trying to put out their stuff to entertain everyone, to try and tell stories, to lift people up, to help them escape, or to, in other instances, really draw attention to some very important issues. It kind of speaks to the magic of not just comics, but the magic of art in general, and I'm glad that many people out there were still able to find enjoyment this year, and many people out there were still able to tell their stories. So whether you're on the top 100 list or whether you're not on the top 100 list, none of that matters. What matters is that comics were great in 2020, comics are going to be great in 2021, comics are always going to be great. So let me know what you thought about comics from 2020 in the comments down below. What were your favorite books? What do you think of any of the books here on this list? If you saw a book that you never heard of but intrigued you and you decided to check it out, let me know your thoughts on it down there as well. You can also always contact me on Twitter and Twitch at Professor Thorgy, and come back later this month as we pick up our regular comic class videos and we return back to normal, whatever normal is for this channel. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time.